I want to share with you what I've learned in the last 20 years when it comes to a SSL certificate. And it's important to understand that, first of all, I want to define what an SSL really is so that you can really understand how this protocol has developed in the last 20 years. So SSL stands for Secure Socket Layer. Secure Sockets Layer, and it actually refers to a protocol for encrypting, securing, and authenticating communications that take place on the internet. So, although SSL was replaced not long ago by an updated protocol called TLS some time ago, I mean, actually during COVID, SSL is still a commonly used term for this technology, okay? So, the main use case for SSL slash TLS is actually very simple: securing communications between a client and a server, but it can also secure email, voice over IP, and other communications over unsecured networks. So basically, for the last 20 years, if I were to really dissect the last 20 years, I would say 15 years have seen the importance, the prominence, if you will, of SSL, whereas the last 5 years have seen the emergence and prominence of TLS. So nowadays, if you are serious about having a website and you just want to really add an extra layer, if you want to add an extra layer of security or encryption or data validation to your site, you want to go for TLS. Don't go for SSL anymore. I mean, SSL is quote unquote outdated. I mean, it's still there. I mean, the protocol is still there. But if you are new, if you're new and you want to really go to a more updated version, go for TLS. Okay. Now there are basically you have to understand that secure communication begins with a TLS handshake, in which the two communicating parties open a secure connection and exchange the public key. Now, this wasn't here 20 years ago, okay? So this is something that I just said it has started about 5 years ago. But if you were to look back and say in terms of development, you would see that basically SSL has contributed a lot, I mean, by a big lot, to securing communications on the internet. And TLS is doing actually an even more superb job. Fantastic. When it comes to SSL certificate in the last 20 years, you have to understand that SSL is good, but like I said, in the last 5 to 7 years, you have seen the emergence of the TLS protocol, and particularly, you actually have what they call a TLS handshake. So nowadays, if you are serious about actually adding an extra layer of encryption to your website, you want to really subscribe to the quote unquote TLS handshake. What is that? Well, TLS handshake actually started, let's say, 2 years before COVID started, like around 2018, 2017. So the TLS handshake is pretty straightforward. Anytime you have TLS communication sessions, you have you have processes that starts with a TLS handshake. So a TLS handshake uses something called asymmetric encryption. So remember that word, asymmetric encryption, meaning that two different keys are used on the two ends of the conversation. So you don't have the same key, you have two different keys. And that's important to sort of confuse bad actors, confuse the hackers, confuse, whatever, whoever is on the internet trying to really trying to mess people up. Okay. So basically, you have two different keys that are used on the two ends of the conversation because of a technique called public key cryptography. So in public key cryptography, and again, what I'm telling you here, this has started in the last 7 years. Okay. So when it comes to public key cryptography, you have two keys that are used: a public key and a private key. So a public key, which the server makes available publicly, and a private key, which is kept secret and only used on the server side. And so data encrypted with a public key can only be decrypted with the private key. So that's kind of cool from a flexibility point of view. And so during the TLS handshake, the clients and server use the public and private keys to exchange randomly generated data. And this random data is used to create new keys for encryption called the session keys. And the session keys have become very prominent in the last 20 years especially in the last the last 5 to 7 years. So you have the session keys. You also have symmetric encryption with session keys. So like I said, you have asymmetric encryption, but there are some times where you can have symmetric encryption. So unlike asymmetric encryption, in symmetric encryption, the two parties in a conversation use the same key, and after the TLS handshake, both sides use the same session keys for encryption. Once session keys are in use, the public and private keys are not used anymore. And session keys are temporary keys. They are not used again once the session is terminated. Okay, this is a one time thing. A new random set of session keys will be created for the next session. So, in terms of digging deeper, in the last 20 years of SSL certificate experience, I've seen a lot changing actually in the industry, not only in terms of what the providers are bringing to the market, but also what the end users are actually putting in place. Okay, and one thing I've seen in the last 20 years is that basically a lot of websites, a lot of servers are basically they are really focusing on authenticating the origin server, the original server. And 20 years ago, SSL certificate providers weren't really paying attention to that. They were just making sure the information was not being visible to bad actors. Nowadays, you have some kind of focus on authenticating the origin server, on validating the origin server, on really like yeah, authentication. That's the right word. Authentication and validation. So TLS communication nowadays from the server include a message authentication code or MAC, which is actually a digital signature confirming that the communication originated from the actual website. It's important to really have that authentication so that basically users can have trust in the whole process. So, because this process authenticates the server, preventing on-path attacks and domain spoofing. And you have a lot of domain spoofing instances happening on the internet nowadays. Also, this process also ensures that the data has not been altered in transit, and you want to have that. You want to have that sort of extra extra confidence, extra trust. And so when you think about SSL certificate, basically the actual definition, the core definition hasn't changed. Maybe the sophistication has changed. Maybe the deployment has changed. Has not been changed. Has improved, but the actual core definition hasn't changed. So if you think about an SSL certificate, think about a file installed on a website's origin server. It's simply a data file containing the public key and the identity of the website owner, along with other information. So without an SSL certificate, a website traffic cannot be encrypted with TLS. So technically, any website owner can create their own SSL certificate, and such certificates are called self-signed certificates. However, browsers do not consider self-signed certificates to be as trustworthy as SSL certificates issued by a certificate authority. I've actually talked a lot about certificate authorities in other videos, by the way. So the thing here is that basically in the last 20 years, I've seen that website owners can get an SSL certificate really easily. It wasn't that easy back in the days, but nowadays the whole process has become more democratic. So if you have a website nowadays, you can really get an SSL certificate real fast. And like I said, you want to go for a TLS, you want to go for the TLS protocol, not the SSL certificate, okay, or not the SSL protocol. So if you are a website owner, you need to obtain an SSL certificate from a CA, in other words, a certificate authority, and then install the certificate on your web server. Often a web host can handle this process for you. Okay, so a CA, certificate authority, is an outside party who can confirm that the website owner is who they say they are. So think about GoDaddy, think about DreamHost, think about you have a lot of players, and a certificate authority actually keeps a copy of the certificates they actually issue on file. Okay. Now, of course, you might be thinking, well, I don't have a lot of cash. I want to really get a free SSL certificate. Well, you can do so. Many certificate authorities charge for SSL certificates, especially in the last 7 to 8 years. So, to help make the internet more secure, you have players such as Cloudflare that actually offer free SSL certificates. But again, like I usually say, you actually get what you pay for. If you are expecting a free lunch, chances are the quality of the lunch might not really be what you were expecting. Okay, of course you can trust Cloudflare, but hey, listen, if you can pay for stuff, pay for stuff. Okay, pay for stuff. And also in the last 20 years, I think you want to understand that HTTP has actually lost more has lost prominence to HTTPS. So nowadays you want to go for HTTPS. Don't go for HTTP. You want to look for the S at the end of HTTP to actually make to mark your websites secure. The S stands for secure. In the last 20 years, with the advent of SSL certificates, you've also seen something called X509. X509 started about 13 years ago. So if you think about X509, I want you to think about a standard that actually defines something pretty straightforward. It defines the format of the digital certificate. Okay, so SSL uses the X509 format. In other words, S, um, what happened here is that SSL certificates are actually X509 certificates. So X.509. So X509 uses a formal language called ASN.1, so abstract syntax notation 1, to actually express the certificate's data structure. And that data structure is really important because you want to have some kind of uniform format so so all web servers can really read it. So the SSL certificate in X509 format includes the following information. So you have the version, the serial number, the public key, the subject, the issuer. You have the valid from data, the valid to data, the signature algorithm, the thumbprint, and you have the thumbprint algorithm. So when I speak about the version, this is the version number of the certificate data format as per X509. In terms of serial number, you have the unique identifier of the certificate assigned by the CA. CA, once again, certificate authority. The public key, this is the owner's public key. You have the subject. The subject stands for the owner's name, address, country, and domain name. The issuer actually refers to the name of the CA who issued the certificate in the first place. Valid from is the date the certificate is valid from. Valid to is the expiration date for the certificate. So that's something that's really important to really keep in mind, okay? And you also want to really think about the signature algorithm is the algorithm used to create the signature. The thumbprint is the hash of the certificate. And the thumbprint algorithm is actually the algorithm used to create a hash of the certificate. So that's something to really think about. So when it comes to the types of SSL certificates, in the last 20 years, I have seen a big development, okay? Back then, when SSL certificates started, all you had were domain validated. So the OV certificates, that was when you had 20 years ago. 20 years ago. And about 13 years ago, you started having OV. So OV stands for organization validated. And in the last 10 years, you actually saw the emergence of the EV certificates. So the EV certificates are actually the highest level of hierarchy, a highest level of authentication when it comes to a validation. But everything started with domain validated certificates, the DVs. Okay, so basically, the domain validated certificates require the lowest level validation because the main purpose of DV certificates is actually to make the secure communication between the domain's web server and browser, and the CA, the certificate authority, only verifies that the owner has a control over the domain. And again, 20 years ago, you didn't have the a complete emergence of e-commerce, for instance, with the likes of Shopify, with the likes of WooCommerce, with the likes of BigCommerce. So there wasn't really the need for more clarity. There wasn't the need for more assurance when it comes to data security or data privacy. But nowadays things have changed, by the way. So that was for DVs, for DV certificates, and the main definition of DV certificates hasn't changed in the last 20 years. It has remained the same. You also have organization validated certificates. That was a second layer of assurance that started about 13 years ago. So the organization validated certificate requires a medium level validation where the CA, for instance, the certificate authority checks the rights of an organization to use the domain and also the organization's information. And the OV certificates enhances the trust level of the organization and its domain. So that's kind of cool from a flexibility point of view. So as I said, in the last 10 years, you've seen the emergence of the more sophisticated level of let's say validation. Okay, and that's the EV. So the EV certificate is really the highest level. And if you see a website, if you happen to see a website nowadays with an EV certificate, you can trust that website big time because it really shows you they are really serious about data security. They're serious about you, let's say visitor information. Like they're really serious. Okay, so the extended validation certificates requires a high level validation where the CA conducts rigorous background checks on the organization according to guidelines. Usually, this includes verification of the legal, physical, and operational existence of the entity. So, if you have banks, if you have insurance companies, if you have big e commerce stores, they use an EV certificates. In other words, they have an extended validation certificates. Okay, that's important. Now, you also have types of SSL certificates based on the number of domains they secure, and this has actually changed in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, you only had something called single domain certificate, and in the last 15 years to 10 years, 10 to 15 years, you've seen the emergence of a wildcard SSL certificate. So the wildcard SSL certificate secures an unlimited number of subdomains for a single domain. For example, a wildcard SSL certificate for example.com will also secure mail.example.com, blog.example.com, etc. You also have the unified SSL certificate, multi-domain SSL certificate, or SAN certificate. And so the unified SSL certificate secures up to 100 domains using the same certificate with the help of the SAN extension. Okay, and it is especially designed actually to secure Microsoft Exchange and Office communication environments. So that's kind of cool. So once you choose what type of SSL certificates you require, you need to procure it from a reputed actually CA. Okay, so that's kind of important. So, in conclusion to this conversation, I share with you what I have seen in the last 20 years when it comes to a SSL certificate. I explained to you how you've seen the emergence of TLS as opposed to SSL, and also the importance of the X509 file. Thank you so much. God bless you. I will see you next time. I want you to remain marvelous. Thank you.